What happens when privilege collides with justice? Witness an arrogant socialite come face to face with a no-nonsense judge and learn a life lesson that will change her forever. On that memorable morning, the Los Angeles County Courthouse was abuzz with quiet murmurs as people shuffled into their seats. It was a typical day at the courthouse, except for one striking detail. This particular hearing was expected to draw significant attention. Tiffany Halstead, a well-known socialite notorious for her reckless behavior and an inflated sense of self, was scheduled to appear before Judge William Grant, a man renowned for his unshakable demeanor, sharp intellect, and fair yet uncompromising approach to justice. Tiffany arrived in her usual fashion, late and unapologetic. Draped in designer labels and sporting oversized sunglasses, she sauntered into the courtroom as though the venue were a red carpet event. Her lawyer, visibly uncomfortable and desperate to minimize the spectacle, hurried behind her. The room, accustomed to proper decorum, fell into a sudden hush as all eyes turned toward Tiffany. Unperturbed by the expectant glances of the assembled crowd, she halted in the middle of the aisle. Seemingly oblivious to the fact that others awaited her presence, she dismissed any formalities with a casual wave, motioning for her lawyer to step aside so she could set her designer bag on the bench. Every gesture exuded entitlement as she removed her sunglasses with exaggerated flair, casting a condescending glance around the room, as if all of this were beneath her. Moments later, Judge William Grant entered. The atmosphere shifted instantly. The murmurs faded, replaced by a respectful silence as the imposing figure took his seat. In his mid-50s, Judge Grant was a man of quiet authority, tall, with a commanding presence and eyes that missed nothing. He scanned the courtroom briefly before settling into his chair. "All rise," announced the bailiff. Tiffany hesitated, clearly irritated, before rising with a heavy sigh that seemed to question the very necessity of her presence. Judge Grant made no comment on her tardiness or attitude. Instead, he adjusted his glasses, opened the file before him, and began the proceedings. Tiffany's case, though ostensibly straightforward, a collection of parking violations combined with an incident of reckless driving that endangered a pedestrian, was about to take a dramatic turn, largely because of her own arrogance. As Judge Grant began outlining the charges, Tiffany's posture shifted. She slouched back in her chair, crossed her arms, and rolled her eyes, a blatant sign of disrespect that did not escape the judge's notice. Yet, instead of addressing her behavior directly, Judge Grant maintained his calm professionalism. His tone was measured, his words deliberate, as though daring her to continue her insolent act. In that moment, the tension in the courtroom grew palpable. Even the most seasoned regulars in the court seemed to sit up a little straighter, sensing that something significant was brewing. However, Tiffany, oblivious to the storm she was inviting, showed no intention of backing down. As the proceedings continued, Tiffany shifted in her seat. Her irritation became more pronounced with every word Judge Grant spoke. She began tapping her manicured nails against the wooden table, the sound loud enough for those nearby to notice. Her lawyer leaned in, whispering something urgently, but Tiffany waved him off dismissively. When Judge Grant asked her to confirm her identity, she barely glanced up. "Yeah, that's me," she replied, in a tone laced with indifference. A collective murmur rippled through the room at her nonchalant response. Judge Grant's expression remained calm, though his eyes lingered on Tiffany for a moment longer than usual. "Miss Halstead," he began steadily, "in this courtroom we adhere to a certain level of decorum. I suggest you adjust your tone accordingly." Tiffany smirked, as if the judge's words were nothing more than a joke. Leaning back in her chair, she twirled a strand of her blonde hair between her fingers and replied with sarcastic ease, "Sure thing, Your Honor." Her voice dripped with mockery, and soft gasps echoed from the audience. The court reporter paused briefly before resuming her transcription. Even Tiffany's lawyer buried his face in his hands, visibly mortified by her blatant display of disrespect. Judge Grant, however, remained unflappable. "Miss Halstead," he said again, his voice firm yet calm, "do you understand the charges brought against you today?" Tiffany rolled her eyes once more, this time audibly sighing as she retorted, "Honestly, no. I mean, it's just some dumb parking tickets and someone getting scared because I hit the gas too hard. This is a waste of time." At her words, the courtroom fell silent, and every eye fixed upon Judge Grant. The judge carefully closed the file in front of him and removed his glasses. deliberately placing them on the bench. For a moment it seemed as though time itself had paused. "Miss Halstead," he said slowly, his calm voice carrying an unmistakable weight, "I would advise you to choose your words carefully from this point forward." The gravity in his tone caused even the most indifferent spectators to sit up straighter. Yet Tiffany, still oblivious to the seriousness of the situation, simply shrugged and said, "What, it's true. It's not like I hurt anyone. This whole thing is ridiculous." What Tiffany failed to realize was that her flippant words were no longer falling on deaf ears. Judge Grant's silence spoke volumes, and the courtroom was about to witness a response they would never forget. Leaning back in his chair, his piercing gaze fixed on Tiffany, the judge allowed a moment of heavy silence to pass, the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone present. Even Tiffany's lawyer, who had been shuffling papers nervously, stopped to glance at the judge. "You believe this is ridiculous, Miss Halstead?" Judge Grant asked in a tone that was steady and almost conversational, without raising his voice, yet carrying an authority that was impossible to ignore. Tiffany scoffed. "Yeah, I do. I mean, come on. It's not like I robbed a bank or something. This is just overkill." She waved her hand dismissively as though brushing away an imaginary nuisance. Judge Grant nodded slowly, folding his hands on the bench. "I see," he said, his calm demeanor heightening the suspense, drawing the spectators closer to the edge of their seats. "Let me clarify something for you, Miss Halstead. The charges against you include not only reckless driving but also endangering a pedestrian's life. The law does not measure accountability by the size of the crime but by its impact. Do you understand that?" Tiffany rolled her eyes yet again, muttering under her breath, Sure, whatever you say." Her whisper was soft, but in the silence of the courtroom it carried a mocking tone. Judge Grant's face remained composed, but there was a subtle shift, a slight narrowing of his eyes and a pause that signaled something was about to change. "Ms. Halstead," he continued, his voice still calm, "do you recall the incident from 2 weeks ago? The one that brought you here today?" Tiffany shrugged, looking bored. "Some guy stepped off the curb. I honked, he moved, end of story," she said dismissively. Judge Grant raised his eyebrows. "End of story, you say?" Tiffany crossed her arms and replied, "No harm, no foul." But Judge Grant was not finished. He reached for a document on the bench, flipping through it with measured precision before addressing the courtroom. "Let the record show," he stated authoritatively, "that the pedestrian in question, Mr. Edward Lopez, is a 67-year-old retired teacher. He was crossing the street legally when you, Ms. Halstead, accelerated toward him, causing him to stumble and injure his wrist. He has since required medical attention and continues to experience pain." At these words, Tiffany's smirk faltered for the first time. She glanced at her lawyer, who whispered something urgently, but she again waved him off. "I didn't hit him," she muttered. "He was fine." "Miss Halstead," Judge Grant continued, directing his full attention back to her, "does this sound like a case of no harm, no foul to you?" Before Tiffany could open her mouth in response, Judge Grant's next move made it abundantly clear that her actions had far-reaching consequences. Consequences she could no longer ignore. His steady gaze remained fixed on her as he continued, "Miss Halstead, your perspective on this matter is troubling, not because of the charges themselves, but because of your refusal to acknowledge the weight of your actions." Tiffany leaned back in her chair, feigning nonchalance, even as the growing tension in the room was impossible to miss. "Look," she said I didn't hit him. People are so dramatic these days." Her comment elicited a few audible gasps from the courtroom gallery. Judge Grant tapped his pen lightly against the desk, pausing for a moment before speaking again. "Dramatic?" he repeated slowly. "Would you like to hear from Mr. Lopez himself, Miss Halstead? Because he is here today in this courtroom." At that, the air grew thick with anticipation. Tiffany's confident facade wavered, and her eyes darted briefly toward the gallery. In the second row sat Mr. Lopez, a man whose arm was in a sling. His weathered face showed no anger, only a quiet disappointment that seemed to cut deeper than any harsh words could. Tiffany shifted uncomfortably in her seat, yet her defiance was not entirely gone. "I'm sure he's fine," she muttered, though her voice no longer carried the earlier bravado. Judge Grant leaned forward slightly, his presence commanding the room. "Miss Halstead, your dismissal of this man's pain speaks volumes about your character. But this isn't just about him. It's about the precedent we set when individuals of privilege believe they are above accountability. The courtroom was so silent that even the faint scratch of the court reporter's pen could be heard. All eyes were now on Judge Grant as they waited to see what he would do next. Then, with a calm that belied the weight of his words, he said, "Since you seem unconcerned about the consequences of your actions, perhaps it is time you experience them firsthand." Tiffany blinked, her earlier bravado crumbling. "What's that supposed to mean?" she asked, her voice tinged with genuine worry for the first time. Judge Grant did not answer immediately. Instead, he gestured toward the bailiff, who handed him a small stack of papers. The judge began reading aloud, detailing the fines, the mandatory community service, and the court-ordered sensitivity training that Tiffany would be required to complete. But it was not the penalties themselves that made the biggest impact. It was the manner in which he delivered them, weaving in a powerful message about privilege, empathy, and the responsibility that comes with living in a shared society. What truly shook Tiffany and the entire courtroom was the unexpected final decision Judge Grant announced, a decision that would force her to confront reality in a way she could no longer avoid. Judge Grant set the papers down, his gaze steady and unwavering. The weight of his next words seemed to fill the room even before they were spoken. "Miss Halstead," he began, "I have reviewed the details of this case extensively. Given the severity of your actions and your blatant disregard for accountability, I am issuing a sentence that I believe will not only address the legal violations, but also provide you with a much-needed perspective." Tiffany sat up straighter, her earlier flippancy replaced by a flicker of unease. "Perspective?" she echoed in a voice edged with disbelief. "Yes, Miss Halstead," Judge Grant said firmly. "In addition to the fines and 200 hours of community service, you will spend the next 30 days volunteering at the downtown women's shelter. You will work directly with individuals who have faced hardship, often through no fault of their own. Perhaps then you will begin to understand the impact of carelessness and entitlement." A collective murmur spread through the room. This was not the typical sentence one expected in a case like this, and the crowd's mixed reactions were palpable. Some nodded in approval while others exchanged incredulous glances, but the most telling reaction came from Tiffany herself. "You've got to be kidding me," she said, her voice rising. "You want me to... what? Hang out with homeless people? That's not my problem." Judge Grant's face did not change, but his voice grew colder. "Miss Halstead, it is precisely that mindset that landed you in this courtroom today. Your actions reflect a lack of understanding, a refusal to see how your choices affect those around you. This is not a punishment. It is an opportunity for growth. And let me be clear, failure to comply will result in a much harsher sentence." At this, Tiffany's lawyer tugged at her sleeve, whispering urgently, but she yanked his arm away. "This is insane," she insisted. "You can't force me to do this." Judge Grant raised his hand, silencing her outburst. "Miss Halstead, this court has the authority to enforce community service as part of your sentence. You will report to the shelter by 8 a.m. each morning, and your supervisor will provide weekly progress updates. Should you fail to cooperate, I will see you back in this courtroom under far less favorable circumstances." The room fell silent once again, the weight of Judge Grant's words hanging heavily in the air. Tiffany's face flushed with anger, but for once she said nothing. She simply sat there, stunned and silent. Yet, the moment was not over. Judge Grant's final remarks would leave a lasting impression on everyone in the room. Adjusting his glasses, his calm demeanor remained unshaken, despite Tiffany's visible defiance. He let the silence stretch for a long moment, ensuring his next words would land with full force. "Miss Halstead," he began, "this courtroom does not exist to humiliate or belittle. It exists to uphold justice and, when possible, to teach. Your privilege has shielded you from consequences for far too long, and that has cost you the ability to empathize. This is not about punishment, it is about helping you reclaim your humanity." The entire courtroom held its collective breath. Tiffany, clearly uncomfortable, glanced toward the gallery. Her bravado was slipping further as she opened her mouth, as if to speak, then thought better of it. "Do you know what Mr. Lopez said when asked about his feelings toward you?" Judge Grant asked, his voice now softer, almost conversational. Tiffany shook her head, her eyes darting briefly to Mr. Lopez, who remained seated in the gallery. His expression was still one of quiet disappointment. He said, Judge Grant continued, "I don't want her to suffer, I just want her to understand. Because if she doesn't, she'll keep hurting people, and one day it might be something she cannot undo." His words landed like a hammer, and for the first time, Tiffany's usual composure began to crumble. Her defiance gave way to something else, discomfort, perhaps even guilt. Judge Grant did not relent. "Mr. Lopez, a man you nearly injured, has chosen grace over anger. He could have pressed for harsher penalties, but instead he asked for something different. An opportunity for you to learn. That is what this sentence represents." Tiffany shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her confidence eroded. The room was so quiet that every small sound, the shuffle of papers, the creak of a bench, seemed amplified. "You will report to the downtown women's shelter on Monday morning," Judge Grant continued, "where you will meet women who have faced challenges you cannot even begin to imagine. Some have lost everything, others are rebuilding their lives from the ground up. You will listen to their stories, and in doing so, I hope you begin to understand the value of humility and accountability." Tiffany looked as though she wanted to protest, but the weight of the moment held her tongue. Her lawyer placed a hand on her arm in a silent signal to remain quiet. Even as the judge's words began to sink in, it was clear that true transformation would only begin once Tiffany faced the realities waiting for her outside the sheltered bubble of her privilege. Finally, with a sharp crack of his gavel, Judge Grant announced, "This court is adjourned." His voice was firm as he rose from his seat and exited the courtroom. In the hours following the hearing, the courthouse buzz slowly faded into memory, but the events of that day would continue to ripple through Tiffany's life. As she sat alone in the quiet of her car in the courthouse parking lot, Tiffany felt a stirring of doubt. Her mind, once filled solely with images of designer parties and effortless glamour, now churned with unsettling questions. Had she truly understood the gravity of her actions? The scornful looks of the gallery and the unyielding resolve of Judge Grant played over in her mind like a relentless loop. Over the next few days, Tiffany's once unchallenged world of luxury and privilege began to show cracks. Friends who had once admired her for her glamorous lifestyle now questioned her character. The headlines and viral clips of the courtroom drama were everywhere. Every social media feed and news channel dissected her behavior and the stern, transformative sentence handed down by Judge Grant. For the first time, Tiffany found herself isolated, not by choice, but by consequence. Reluctantly, on the following Monday morning, Tiffany reported to the downtown women's shelter. The modest building, in stark contrast to her usual haunts, was abuzz with activity as volunteers and staff bustled about. Her arrival was met by a staff member, a no-nonsense woman in her 40s, who greeted her with a mixture of firmness and kindness. "You must be Tiffany," she said. "Welcome. Let's get you started." Despite her initial reluctance, Tiffany soon found herself immersed in the daily routines of the shelter. At first, the tasks were mundane: preparing meals, serving food, cleaning up after long days. Tiffany worked silently, her usual arrogance replaced by a hesitant effort to blend into the background. However, as the days passed, she began to notice subtle details that she had never cared to observe before: the genuine gratitude in the eyes of the shelter's guests, the camaraderie among the staff, and the strength that emanated from the stories shared by those who had lost so much. During a quiet lunch break, a single mother of 3 recounted the hardships of her daily struggles. "You think you've got it all figured out," the mother said softly, locking eyes with Tiffany. "Life has a way of teaching you what really matters." The words struck a chord deep within Tiffany. Slowly, the hours at the shelter began to transform her. What had started as a begrudging obligation evolved into a period of introspection. Tiffany began to listen, truly listen, to the stories of the women and families she encountered. Their tales of loss, resilience, and hope slowly chipped away at the walls of entitlement she had built around herself. In the evenings, when she returned to her temporary apartment, Tiffany found herself unable to escape the echoes of the day's lessons. Images of tearful gratitude, shared meals, and quiet conversations filled her thoughts. As weeks turned into a month, Tiffany's transformation became evident even to those around her. The woman who had once prided herself on her untouchable lifestyle now carried a quiet humility. Her laughter, once sharp and dismissive, grew softer, imbued with an understanding that had been previously foreign to her. The social circles that once revolved solely around extravagant parties and shallow compliments began to fade, replaced by invitations to community events and volunteer gatherings, places where genuine connection and empathy were valued above all else. One crisp morning, as Tiffany helped set up for a community dinner at the shelter, she found herself seated beside one of the shelter's longtime volunteers, a wise older woman named Maria. Over the course of the evening, between moments of shared silence and quiet conversation, Maria spoke of the hardships she had endured and the slow, painful process of healing. "Change isn't given to you on a silver platter," Maria said gently. "It is earned through understanding, sacrifice, and the willingness to see beyond your own world." Tiffany listened intently, feeling as though every word was a key, unlocking a part of her heart she had long kept shut. That evening, as the community dinner wound down and the shelter's residents began to disperse, Tiffany lingered behind. She found herself drawn to the corner where a faded photograph hung on the wall, a picture of a group of women whose eyes radiated strength and solidarity, despite evident hardship. In that moment, Tiffany's eyes welled up with tears. For the first time, she truly grasped the meaning of accountability and the power of empathy. It was as though the experiences of the past month had awakened a long-dormant part of her soul, a part that yearned to connect, to understand, and to grow. When Tiffany's 30-day sentence came to an end, she returned to Judge Grant's courtroom. This time, the atmosphere was markedly different. Gone was the defiant swagger and dismissive eye rolls. In their place was a quiet, introspective demeanor that spoke of hard-earned growth. As Tiffany stood before Judge Grant once more, she met his steady gaze with a newfound humility. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice steady and sincere, "for not giving up on me." Judge Grant allowed a small, approving nod. "The real thanks," he replied, "will come when you take what you have learned and use it to make a difference." His words, simple yet profound, resonated deeply with everyone in the room. As Tiffany left the courthouse that day, the bright sunlight seemed to symbolize the fresh start before her. She carried with her a small but powerful hope, a chance not only to rebuild her life, but also to reshape her perspective on privilege, responsibility, and empathy. In the months that followed, Tiffany's journey continued to evolve. No longer was she defined solely by her former life of extravagance and indifference. Instead, she began to embrace opportunities for genuine service and community engagement. She organized charity events, participated in local initiatives, and even established a foundation dedicated to providing support for those in need. Tiffany's transformation became a beacon of hope and a powerful reminder that change is possible, even for those who once seemed untouchable by the consequences of their actions. As Tiffany worked to forge a new path, she often recalled the pivotal day in Judge Grant's courtroom, a day that had challenged her to confront the harsh realities of her own behavior and the impact it had on others. It was a turning point, not only in her personal life, but in the broader community's understanding of justice and accountability. Her story was shared widely, inspiring countless individuals to reevaluate their own lives and the privileges they sometimes took for granted. The powerful lesson Tiffany learned was that true change is not imposed from without, it must come from within. It requires humility, introspection, and the courage to acknowledge one's own shortcomings. In a final reflective address during a community forum that Tiffany organized, she spoke directly to the gathered audience. "I stand before you not as the person I once was, but as someone who has learned, painfully but truly, the meaning of accountability. Our actions have consequences, not only for ourselves but for everyone around us. Today I ask each of you to consider what you might do differently, to open your hearts, to listen, and to understand that privilege does not exempt us from responsibility. Let us all strive to make choices that reflect not just our desires, but also our duty to one another." Her words, filled with vulnerability and hope, moved many to tears. Judge Grant's legacy, too, lived on beyond the confines of that courtroom. His unwavering commitment to justice and his willingness to teach difficult lessons became a model for legal professionals and community leaders alike. In his quiet way, he had demonstrated that the role of a judge is not only to enforce the law, but also to foster growth and understanding, a mission that resonated far beyond legal proceedings. The story of Tiffany Halstead and Judge Grant ultimately serves as a reminder that the collision of privilege and justice can be transformative. When an individual is forced to confront the realities of their actions and the pain they may have caused, true growth becomes possible. It is a testament to the power of accountability, the importance of empathy, and the enduring belief that every person, regardless of their past, has the capacity to change. In reflecting on these events, we are reminded that justice is not a static concept. It is a dynamic process that requires us to continually learn, adapt, and strive for a more compassionate society. The lessons taught in that Los Angeles County courtroom extend far beyond the legal sphere. They challenge us to look within ourselves, to recognize our own privileges, and to understand that with great privilege comes great responsibility. As you close this story, consider the profound question it poses. What will you do today to open your heart and mind to the lessons that life has to teach? In a world where injustice and inequality persist, each of us has the power and the duty to make a difference. Let Tiffany's journey inspire you to embrace change, to seek out understanding, and to contribute positively to the lives of those around you. For in the end, it is through humility, compassion, and the willingness to learn from our mistakes that we can truly transform not only ourselves, but the world we share. This is the story of a collision between privilege and justice, a collision that left an indelible mark on one woman's life and sparked a movement toward greater accountability and empathy. May it serve as a lasting reminder that real change is possible when we are willing to face the truth about ourselves and work together to build a more just, compassionate society.